Hello, Mark here with a special recording of the second academic writing workshop of the semester. Rather than share a recording of the session, which was lovely and interactive, and thank you everyone who participated, I thought I'd record a separate kind of shorter version for anyone who couldn't make it or wants some kind of recap. So, session 2 is called They Say, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, then just wait a minute, because I will give a recap in kind of Netflix style of what happened in the previous session. So in the first session, I was talking about academic communities as a way of introducing academic writing, and we established that, I think, in life we belong to a number of different communities, and we move between them, and we have different roles in the different communities that we belong to. But in every community we belong to, there's some communication, which might be spoken and it might be written, and in most cases it's a mixture of both. And last week I was saying that, in the first session I was saying that academic communities are all about knowledge, research, analysis, complexity, and respect. And as a result, academic writing is rooted in reading and research. It needs to communicate complex ideas and address difficult questions. It needs to show respect, and it tends to have word limits. Okay, and how this relates to the community is that the norms of academic writing, we follow kind of unwritten rules that are established by the community and the way the community communicates and behaves. But bear in mind that those rules aren't kind of set in stone, they're not fixed in time. Communities develop over time, and so will the way that they communicate. But academic writing in November 2022 is all of these things: rooted in reading research, needs to communicate complex ideas and address difficult questions, needs to show respect, and tends to have word limits. And if I want to summarize that in a way that I hope is meaningful to you, I would say that academic writing, as a result of all of that, needs to be precise, concise, and respectful. And anytime, if you ever talk to me or write to me and we discuss your own work, we'll always be looking at how can we make it as precise as possible, how can we make it as concise as possible, and how can we make sure that it's respectful in the way that we want it to be, right? So in the first session we talked about academic writing being like a conversation in a room between people with different positions and ideas, presenting different information that they've got. There might be some things that they agree on. They might have different interpretations of data and facts. But it's like a conversation. And I am a big fan of a book called They Say, I Say by Graf and Birkenstein, which starts by establishing that writing is like a conversation, and argues that academic writing is always a response to what other people have written, or what we imagine other people may have written or are going to write. And that in the Graf and Birkenstein's approach, They Say, I Say, we always start with what they say, and then we build on that to introduce what I say. And our basic response to things will be either they say this, but no, I don't agree. They say this, and yes, I agree. They say this, and yes, but. Okay, and that's maybe one of the more interesting avenues for us to explore in coming sessions. In the live session of this workshop, we started to explore They Say via this statement, which you may or not have seen before: the camera never lies. And I asked people, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you agree partially? And in the live workshop we discuss, people gave their answers and gave a reason why. And you're very welcome to do that with anyone who will listen to you and engage in this conversation. But then what I'd like you to do is notice what your position is now and just park it to one side for a moment. Because academic writing is not about just trying to reinforce what you already thought, because that's not education, that's not exploration. You can't think critically if all you're doing is trying to find people who agree with you and trying to find support for what you already believe. So it's important to be aware of what your starting point is on any question, but then when we're doing some writing to try to address a question, we put our original position or opinion or feeling, whatever, to one side, and then we try to make sure that we can build a more reasoned position in relation to maybe more expert authors that we read. Okay. So what we do in the workshop is we start by looking at this short text. Edward Weston was a 20th century photographer, and he said this about photography. He wrote, and I've taken this from a book called On Photography by Susan Sontag. And Edward Weston writes, "Only with effort can the camera be forced to lie. Basically, it's an honest medium, so the photographer is much more likely to approach nature in a spirit of inquiry, of communion, instead of with the saucy swagger of self-dubbed artist." And then I present 4 possible kind of summaries of that, which I wrote, and I'd ask you to have a look at these and choose which one you like best. And you might notice that they're all reasonable summaries of what Weston says. B is the most concise, but it's maybe not detailing enough. It's kind of picking a particular point and focusing on that. A is relatively precise and I think captures the essence of what Weston says, really in relation to that statement of the camera never lies. So we are using the camera lies sometimes, but this is Edward Weston saying yes, but in response to that statement. Statement D is a little bit problematic because it relies a bit too heavily on the wording of the original text. So perhaps I should have put honest medium and spirit of inquiry in quotation marks. And I think maybe C is the most complete summary of that source. But you may have your personal preferences. And when I asked students in the workshop to give their responses, they gave really interesting responses. So you can pause the video and read these yourself. I won't go through them, but notice that we were developing the skill of writing about what someone else said. So the majority of our sentences begin with his name, Weston. And we started to notice that people were choosing reporting verbs like Weston agrees, Weston believes, Weston states. And I should point out that typically in academic writing we use the present simple for things like this. So we've got Weston is saying. That's perfectly good in a conversation, but if we're putting this in writing, then probably Weston states that. And number 10 is a statement that we kind of came back to later and we added a reference to because Weston was cited, as I just said, by Susan Sontag in her book On Photography from 1977. Okay, so I was really impressed with everyone's contributions, and I think we see there immediately short text, short response. Our response is even shorter. And it should be because we're trying to be concise, but we're also working hard at finding a precise way to use that short text to answer a specific question. Weston wasn't answering the question, the camera never lies, what do you think? But we were. So we were trying to show what does Weston say in relation to that. And I thought that worked quite well. We then moved on to a second text. Margaret Bourke-White, another photographer. She worked with someone called Mr. Caldwell, who she references here, and she wrote this: "Sometimes I would set up the camera in a corner of the room, sit some distance away from it with a remote control in my hand, and watch our people while Mr. Caldwell talked with them. It might be an hour before their faces or gestures gave us what we were trying to express, but the instant it occurred, the scene was imprisoned on a sheet of film before they knew what had happened." So notice that, unlike the quotation from Edward Weston, this text is a bit longer. She's not saying she's not saying anything about honesty, is she, or a camera lying, but that doesn't mean it doesn't help us to answer the question. So we have to work a little bit harder to think about how this description of actions and perspective on photography, how that helps us to answer a question about whether or not a camera is honest. Okay? This also came from Susan Sontag's on photography, by the way. And the responses, again, some really nice responses here. I'll just, you can pause and read through them. You can write your own. We've got a couple of mistakes here. We've got a couple of lowercase whites. So Bork White should have capital letters because we want to be respectful. We are a bit more kind of focused on reporting language here. So we're saying things like suggests and states, makes an effort to capture, and so on. But you might want to think about these questions, because in this extract, Margaret Bork White describes doing something. Okay, she describes setting up a camera in a corner of a room and waiting for a moment before she takes a photo of her subject. She also suggests something about the power of photography. She talks at the end about how taking a photo captures something forever. The scene was imprisoned on a sheet of film before they knew what had happened. So, yeah, before we have to consider those two things in order to relate the statement to the camera never lying, because in one way it's just capturing something that happens in a room, but in another way it's a moment that's been deliberately chosen from one of many. It might be an hour before the faces or gestures gave us what we were trying to express. So there's a sense here that the photographer is not just capturing an image, but wants to say something with that image. Okay? Sorry. And at this point, I'd like to emphasize, as I did in the live workshop, there's a difference here between saying and doing. That when we read academic texts, or when we read any text, we might read about ideas and we might read about actions. Sometimes we have to report actions, and sometimes we have to report positions. Okay, and when we talk about what Margaret Bork White did, we will use particular verbs, and when we talk about what she suggests, we'll use different verbs. And you'll notice that when we talk about what people did, we'll typically use the past tense, and we see this you'll see this in a lot of the text that you have to read at university. When you're reading about somebody else's research, you'll be reading what other people have done. So when you're reporting that, you might find that verbs like found, discovered, demonstrated, published, reviewed, studied, conducted research into, you might find those to be useful verbs. Whereas when you are writing about what other people say, the conclusions they draw, the arguments they make, you might find yourself using verbs like suggest, claim, state, argue, maintain, conclude. If you want to say that you agree with something that has been said by someone else, you can use point out. But do notice that point out is a way of saying this person is correct. So your choice of verb here is the beginning of you bringing your voice into your writing. It's a very small detail, but it's very important. Okay? If you'd like to explore this kind of language further, there's a resource you can use called the Academic Phrase Bank, which draws together useful language from a huge study into the way that academic texts kind of function. And so the research team behind the Academic Phrase Bank put together this brilliant resource where you can find pretty much anything that you need to do in academic writing, which will become more and more useful for you as you start doing research yourself. Whether you're introducing your own work, referring to other people, writing your conclusion, describing a trend, giving a definition, you'll be able to find language to help you to do that in this resource. And that's all come from published academic texts. So as well as using a resource like this when you write, you could also just notice when you're reading what kind of language is used in the text that I read within my field. And I think what you'll find is that, and what other people have found, is that different subject areas do tend to favour some verbs over others. And sometimes that's because of the nature of the subject and the nature of the belief in knowledge of that subject. And sometimes it's about writing conventions as well. So hard sciences, we tend to see not too many of those verbs at all. But I don't know if anyone doing chemistry will be, or physics will be watching this video, but you may notice an absence of this kind of language in the reading that you do. But do tell me what you find, if you find anything interesting. The last thing that we did in the workshop was I asked the participants that if they wanted to reference this book that I've been referring to, Susan Sontag's On Photography, what information would you need in order to do it? And people quite rightly said, well, we need to know the author's name, we need to know the date of publication, the title of the text, the place of publication, the name of the publisher, and the pages that were referenced. And you can access the Google document from the workshop to see the full reference. But you can also see 6 attempts at writing this reference that didn't go quite to plan. For reassurance, when you're referencing for the first time, no one knows how to do it. It's a little bit like the first time you go to a gym, you don't know how to use any of the equipment. Everyone else looks like they know what they're doing, but you just have to get in there and start trying, and you'll learn. And if you start going regularly, you'll learn how to do everything, and you'll find it much easier to start like lifting those weights or whatever it is that you want to do in a gym. Okay. So we've talked about they say. The next step is to move to I say and starting your response, which is what we'll explore in the next session. And I thought I'd leave you with this. In the workshop yesterday, I'm recording this on a Friday, the workshop was on a Thursday, there was a point where one student wrote this. I won't read it aloud, but you can pause the video and read. And I think this is very interesting, right? Because this is a student trying to bring their perspective, their experience, and their voice to that question. And I think we're not quite ready to do that because we have to build on what they say. So in the next session, when we look at I say, we're going to try to refine this kind of response so that we can make sure that, yes, we're bringing our own contribution to our writing, but we're basing it in the first instance on what we've read, which is typically what people want to see from you in assignments and academic writing generally. So, a quick recap before I end this video. We need to be able to report what others say and what others have done. We need to be able to link what we read to what we need to write, i.e. the question that we've been set. So in this case that was, the camera never lies. Yes or no. We need to do this kind of thing precisely, concisely, and respectfully. You're going to get very bored of me saying those 3 words. To be precise and respectful, we need to report the source accurately. To be respectful, we need to show our reader the difference between our words and ideas and the author's words and ideas. And actually, everyone in all the examples I've shown you in this video do that pretty well. And finally, to be respectful to the author and our reader, we need to be able to reference our sources, which we are learning to do and which we are going to become better at. As usual, any questions, concerns, feedback, I would love to hear. You can email me directly at m.holloway3@hearts.ac.uk. If you're watching this video on YouTube, you can you can like, subscribe, and make a comment. No one ever does that, but it would be great if you did. And you can also comment through Canvas if you've got access to the Academic Writing Canvas page. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.